I have always shared a close relationship with my two aunts, Aunt Laura and Aunt Monica. They were only about a decade older than me and felt more like older sisters than traditional aunts during my childhood. Aunt Laura was bold, constantly brimming with energy and new ideas, while Aunt Monica had a softer, more caring nature and was always ready to listen to concerns with patience and without judgment. They were inseparable, always showing up together at family gatherings, and I admired the strong bond they shared. One evening, after dinner at my mother's house, Aunt Laura casually suggested a weekend getaway for the three of us: herself, Aunt Monica, and me. She made the suggestion while sipping her wine, her tone light and cheerful, though the way she phrased it caught my attention. Aunt Monica looked up abruptly, seeming hesitant, but she didn't voice any objections, leaving the idea to stand unchallenged. "Just the three of us?" I asked, laughing nervously. "Why not invite everyone else?" "That's the point," Aunt Laura replied with a steady smile. "It's just for us, to spend some time together and bond." The idea struck me as unusual, as I couldn't recall a time when just the three of us had ever done anything like this. Family outings typically included everyone, and the exclusivity of this plan felt out of place. However, after a brief moment of silence, Aunt Monica gave a reluctant nod, suggesting that it might be nice. Though I felt uncertain, I reminded myself that they were family, and I had no real reason to decline. Aunt Laura's excitement was infectious, and Aunt Monica seemed cautiously optimistic as we finalized the details. Still, I couldn't help but notice subtle things that left me uneasy. Quiet conversations between them, fleeting glances loaded with unspoken meaning. I dismissed these observations, convincing myself that I was reading too much into nothing. In the days leading up to the trip, I found myself caught between anticipation and anxiety. I tried to push aside the nagging sense of unease, reminding myself it was only a weekend, nothing more. Yet, there were moments when I caught Aunt Monica watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, part guilt, part sadness. Meanwhile, Aunt Laura remained lively and upbeat, acting as if the trip was the most natural thing in the world. When the day finally arrived, they picked me up early in the morning. Aunt Laura took the wheel, animatedly chatting about the activities we could try, while Aunt Monica sat quietly in the passenger seat. I tried to match their enthusiasm, but a lingering sense of unease stayed with me. Something about the trip felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on why. As the car sped toward our destination, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a simple family outing. Something awaited me at the end of this journey, and I wasn't ready for it. The drive itself was uneventful, but the destination was far from ordinary. We arrived at a secluded cabin deep in the woods, surrounded by towering trees and complete stillness. The setting was picturesque, almost surreal, but the isolation was unsettling. Aunt Laura unlocked the door and welcomed me inside with an enthusiastic smile. Aunt Monica hesitated on the threshold, her eyes darting around nervously. The cabin was both cozy and unexpectedly luxurious. The living room featured a large stone fireplace, plush furnishings, and expansive windows that allowed the soft glow of the afternoon sun to fill the space. Aunt Laura immediately began unpacking, humming a cheerful tune as she moved around the room. Aunt Monica, on the other hand, busied herself in the kitchen, deliberately avoiding eye contact. I stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, unsure of what to do, feeling like an outsider in what was supposed to be a bonding trip. By evening, the mood had shifted. Aunt Laura uncorked a bottle of wine and poured generous glasses for all of us, encouraging us to relax. "This is supposed to be fun," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "To family and new experiences." Aunt Monica hesitated briefly before clinking her glass with ours, her smile strained and uneasy. As the wine flowed, Aunt Laura's demeanor became even more animated. She began recounting stories from her youth, wild, uninhibited tales I had never heard before. Her candor was surprising, almost shocking. Aunt Monica, however, grew increasingly uncomfortable, her glances in my direction becoming more frequent and tinged with something apologetic. Then, almost without warning, Aunt Laura leaned forward, her lively tone fading as she lowered her voice. "Monica and I have discussed this trip," Aunt Laura began, her words deliberate, "and we see it as an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" I asked, the previously relaxed atmosphere of the evening dissolving almost instantly. Her eyes gleamed with an enigmatic quality as she answered cryptically, her voice steady but vague. Aunt Monica reached out, placing a hand on her sister's arm, as though to stop her. Yet Laura pressed on, encouraging us to step out of our comfort zones and embrace something new together. Her words lingered, weighted and ambiguous, leaving my mind scrambling to decipher their meaning. Aunt Monica's face had turned pale, her lips pressed into a tight line. "Laura," she began hesitantly, "perhaps we should tell her." Aunt Laura interrupted firmly, her tone unwavering. "We agreed this was the right moment." I looked between them, a swirl of confusion and discomfort knotting in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" I finally asked, my voice edged with uncertainty. Aunt Monica's gaze met mine, a mixture of shame and desperation in her eyes. "There's something personal we need to share with you," she said, her vagueness only heightening my growing unease. Aunt Laura reclined in her chair, sipping her wine with a satisfied smile, as though she'd already said all that needed to be said. Meanwhile, Aunt Monica looked as though she might cry at any moment. I felt trapped, burdened by their unspoken words. My instinct was to leave, to fabricate an excuse and escape the room. But instead, I stayed, hoping they'd explain themselves if I gave them the chance. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the faint whistle of the wind outside. In that moment, I realized this weekend was not going to be ordinary. Something far deeper and more complex was unfolding. The silence became unbearable, and I finally broke it. "What are you trying to tell me? Just say it," I demanded, my voice sharper than I'd intended, the strain evident. Aunt Monica flinched, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Aunt Laura, on the other hand, seemed unfazed, almost amused by my frustration. "It's not that simple," Aunt Monica murmured, her eyes fixed on the floor. "It's time," Aunt Laura cut in, her confidence unshaken. "We've held back for far too long. She needs to face this." Her tone softened as she leaned forward. "We want to share something unique with you, something that we believe will bring us closer as a family." Her words were exhausting in their vagueness. "Get to the point," I insisted, my patience wearing thin. Aunt Laura's smile remained steady as she spoke with unsettling candor. "We're breaking free from the societal norms that divide us. We've spent too much time adhering to meaningless rules, and now it's time to let them go." Her statements were puzzling, yet the implications began to take shape in my mind. My heart raced as I tried to grasp the full weight of what she was saying. "You're not making any sense," I said, my voice trembling. "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" Finally, Aunt Monica lifted her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We've never been able to be fully honest about who we are, not even with family. But we thought you might understand." Her voice wavered, and she quickly looked away, unable to hold my gaze. "What is it I'm supposed to understand?" I asked, my voice shaking. Aunt Laura leaned in closer, her expression serious. "We want to challenge the barriers that separate us, to redefine what family means, and we're inviting you to join us in this journey." The room seemed to tilt, and I gripped the arms of my chair to steady myself. Their words were thick with insinuation, and I could no longer ignore the subtext. "This is wrong," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Whatever you're suggesting, it's not right." Aunt Laura's demeanor shifted, her expression hardening. "Who decides what's right or wrong?" she countered. "Why should we let a society full of strangers dictate how we live when we can create something better for ourselves?" "That's enough, Laura," Aunt Monica interjected, her voice trembling. "This isn't what we agreed on. We were supposed to talk, not force anything." "I'm not forcing anything," Aunt Laura snapped back. "I'm offering an opportunity for honesty and freedom." I stood, my legs unsteady beneath me. "This isn't freedom. It's manipulation. I want no part of whatever you're trying to involve me in." Aunt Monica's voice broke as she pleaded. "Please, just listen. We didn't mean to hurt you or make you uncomfortable. We thought you might understand." I shook my head, disbelief and confusion clouding my thoughts. "I don't understand and I don't want to," I said firmly. The air in the room felt suffocating, their eyes heavy on me as I avoided their gaze. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, confusion, disbelief, and a sense of betrayal. How had this shifted from a simple family trip to something so strange and overwhelming? Whatever they expected from me, I knew I couldn't give it to them, now or ever. The next morning, I woke feeling drained. Sleep had eluded me, my thoughts endlessly replaying the events of the previous night. The cabin, once welcoming, now felt stifling and oppressive. I could hear faint noises from the living room, but I stayed in bed, trying to sort through the chaos in my mind. It was clear that, despite our shared history, the confrontation ahead was unavoidable. When I eventually stepped out, both aunts were seated at the dining table, their expressions heavy with emotion. Aunt Monica looked drained, her eyes red and downcast, avoiding direct eye contact with me. Aunt Laura appeared calm, though there was a subtle softness in her demeanor, perhaps a trace of regret, or maybe resolve. "We need to talk," Aunt Monica said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was delicate, as though she feared it might shatter. I nodded in agreement but chose to remain standing rather than take a seat. "I don't even know where to begin," I admitted, frustration evident in my tone. "Your comments last night crossed a line, a serious one." Aunt Laura leaned back in her chair, her previously unwavering confidence now dimmed. "That was never our intention," she replied, her tone measured. "We thought this trip would give us the chance to have an honest conversation about a long-standing issue we've been struggling with. Clearly, we miscalculated." "You think I overreacted?" I said sharply. "But no matter what difficulties you're facing, it doesn't justify dragging me into this situation." Aunt Monica suddenly lifted her head, her tear-filled eyes determined. "You're right," she said firmly. "You're absolutely right. This should have been handled differently. I should have stepped in before it got to this point." Aunt Laura glanced at her sister, a flicker of irritation crossing her face, though she didn't argue. Instead, she sighed deeply and turned her attention to me. "We made a mistake. I see that now. But our intentions weren't malicious. We wanted to share something important with you, something that has brought us a sense of freedom. What we failed to do was consider how it might affect you." I folded my arms, remaining wary. "And what exactly is this something?" Last night, all I got were vague statements and unsettling implications. Aunt Monica hesitated, taking a moment to gather her thoughts before speaking. "It's difficult to explain," she began softly. "We've always felt constrained by the expectations of family and society. We wanted to create a space where we could express ourselves honestly. But we went too far, and in doing so, we dragged you into something you never agreed to be part of. For that, I am deeply sorry." Despite the sincerity in her voice, it didn't lessen the impact of what had happened. "I don't know if I can look at either of you the same way again," I admitted. "This whole experience has changed everything." Aunt Laura nodded slowly, her face unreadable. "We understand that," she said quietly. "We pushed too hard and crossed boundaries. If you need time or space, take it. Please know that none of this was meant to hurt you." I didn't respond right away, the weight of unspoken emotions filling the room. I lacked the energy to untangle them all. "I think I'll leave early," I finally said, my tone firm but cold. Neither of them tried to stop me. Aunt Monica nodded, silent tears rolling down her cheeks, while Aunt Laura averted her gaze, her jaw tight. Gathering my belongings, I stepped outside into the crisp morning air, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. The bond I had always cherished with my aunts now felt fractured, perhaps beyond repair. I wasn't sure if time would heal what had been broken or if we could ever return to the way things were. But one thing was certain: some boundaries, once crossed, leave permanent marks. And sometimes the only way forward is to walk away.